started an organization called Indigenous Climate Action, and I have worked alongside the Wet'suwet'en nations that live within the territories that the coastal Gaslink traverses through. Since 2010, I visited the territories where I was a part of a group of Indigenous land defenders that came together to support the Wet'suwet'en in setting up a hereditary land reoccupation in their traditional lands. At the time, they were opposing the Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline, which was a tar sands pipeline that carried oil from my traditional territory through their territories to the coast of British Columbia. However, that pipeline was canceled because of the incredible efforts of so many Indigenous peoples, which has slowed down the expansion of tar sands in my territory, and since then I have continued to work alongside the Indigenous nations that are fighting other new pipelines that are emerging in their lands and territories. And I'm here to share the story of the coastal Gaslink pipeline.
Thank you, and if you could provide facts and evidence for this.
So the coastal Gaslink pipeline is a LNG pipeline, liquefied natural gas pipeline, that is proposed to traverse 670 kilometers from the mountain regions inside the interior of British Columbia to the coast. More importantly, 190 kilometers of this pipeline is set to go through the Wet'suwet'en Nation's traditional territories, which encompasses wetlands, cultural sites, and the Wet'suwet'en River, which is a traditional and cultural significant river, and this is also part of the Skeena watershed. Overall, this pipeline is set to traverse 206 different waterways. These waterways are the home of salmon spawns and also numerous Indigenous communities, lifelines, and cultural significance. This is critical habitat for spawning for sockeye salmon, and these river systems hold deep cultural value to many Indigenous nations. This is a source of sustenance for the lifeways of the Wet'suwet'en people. This pipeline particularly involves the digging of massive trenches that are ripping up trees, traversing and ripping up and disturbing streams and river systems and critical waterways. These are the critical biodiversity. This critical biodiversity is not only of cultural significance to the Wet'suwet'en peoples and nations, but it is critical for climate stabilization. This project has not been without its critique from the government itself. Even though this project was proposed in 2012 and has been approved, there have been more than 50 warnings issued from the BC Environment and Assessment Office, 16 orders and 2 fines. These are things like failing to maintain erosion and sediment controls, waste management issues, and missing deadlines on caribou and conservation plans. Last year, the project was cited as disturbing critical spawning grounds after it ripped up a critical river system and bed. This was cited and issued by the Wet'suwet'en nations that said this is another assault on their hereditary and treaty rights in the region. But that wasn't the first time. In 2020, there were two diesel spills that had already occurred along the pipeline construction route. In 2021, 1,000 liters of contaminant were spilled along the construction route as well, contaminating these critical key areas. I need to remind you, the Wet'suwet'en nations have opposed this project since 2012, and we have to understand the rights of these nations. In Canada, we have what are known as treaty rights, but the Wet'suwet'en nations are not a part of treaty. However, in 1997, the Supreme Court of Canada, under a case called Derenger, stated that these nations never gave up their rights and title and maintained authority and jurisdiction. These projects, the project of the Coastal Gaslink pipeline is linking not just this project from a pipeline project to the coast, but this is LNG. We cannot afford liquid natural gas projects. Fracked gas is proposed to be delivered and produced in the Dawson Creek area and all the way down to an LNG facility near Kitimat. The Kitimat facility is owned by Shell Oil. From there, it will be delivered to the global markets. Fracking itself Well, the pipeline is just the delivery. The fracking of the gas that goes through this pipeline requires massive amounts of water and energy, the energy necessary to create liquid natural gas, which I won't get into. And all of this fracking, sorry, I lost my notes. The fracking itself is also disrupting the shale and ecosystems, causing earthquakes in the region. And this has been noted by many scientists. And for the communities that are fighting these projects on the front lines, this is not just about the coastal Gaslink pipeline. It is not just one. If this project becomes approved, it will set a precedence for more pipelines, such as the Pacific Trails and West Coast Connector gas transmission pipeline, owned by Enbridge again, and the Prince Rupert gas transmission pipeline, which is owned by TC Energy to the Prince Rupert facilities. All in all, we are seeing that these projects, if they go online, will create 15 megatons of carbon pollution by 2050. All of this is being approved despite the fact that local governments have made commitments to net zero by 2050. Additionally, I want to state that the communities are not just fighting these projects by occupying their lands. They have protested and set up blockades to block construction of this, so much so that the government was able to work, or the corporation was able to work with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to put forward an injunction that allowed them to raid the traditional hereditary camps of the Wet'suwet'en Nations. And in 2019, they raided these camps with extreme violence, including chopping down the front door with an axe, while one of my staff members, who was a community member, was inside screaming for help. These violent raids in the communities have continued, and what has happened is now there were 4 charges against hereditary leaders and community members, and we have now seen the first prisoner of conscience in Canada, which is one of the chiefs of the Wet'suwet'en Nations. This resulted in a massive scale of Indigenous peoples coming and asking for action across the country. These unjust injunctions must stop. These pipelines must stop. In the wise words of Casey Camp, one of our esteemed judges today, these nations and people, my community, my allies have stopped projects in my nation. I must stand alongside of them, because we are not protecting nature. We are nature protecting itself. Rights of the Wet'suwet'en Nations. We cannot afford these projects for the nations and for the climate for all. Thank you. Masicho.